Good afternoon. My name is Valeria Coffaro, and thank you, ACERT, for inviting me to present today. I'm going to share my screen so you can see my slide here. Let's see. There you go. Can everybody see it? Good. Wait. What's something? Sorry, it was continue to share. Okay, it was working before. Working. Let me minimize this. Okay. All right. So I'm a professor at the Nutrition and Public Health Department, and I teach nutrition courses at the undergraduate level. And today I will talk about the various ways that I integrated AI in my teaching. Oh, okay, there you go. Sorry, technical issues. So in the last years, I've been experimenting quite a bit with AI. Both in ways that I ask students in things that I ask students to do, and also how I do my own work. So for the student-facing side, students learn about AI literacy by using AI and evaluating AI outputs. They also interact with instructional agents that I created to support their learning. On the instructor-facing side, I use AI to improve and simplify my workflow, and I also use it for communication purposes. And today I will show you some concrete examples that I hope you can adapt to your own teaching. But I certainly didn't start here. I started where many faculty, I think, started. I noticed that my students were submitting content, like work that was clearly AI generated. And my initial response was, how do I stop this? And I created a very restrictive policy. I had them sign an agreement, and there were a lot of do's and don'ts, and everything that wasn't explicitly permitted was considered academic misconduct. Okay. But then I had to learn myself about AI, because if I was gonna successfully regulate it in my class, then I had to learn what it was all about, and that's why I joined the my first Camp AI last winter. And for those of you who don't know, Camp AI is actually a wonderful opportunity that is offered by the Center for Digital Learning and Innovative Pedagogy, and it's open to all CUNY faculty to learn, experiment, and practice hands-on with GenAI. And that first camp led to my first assignment, my first AI assignment. I created an assignment where the students use AI to investigate nutrition information. The students would ask a question to AI, examine the output, verify sources, and then reflect on that experience. So that was the first shift from how do I stop students from using AI to what could they learn by using AI. And this is probably the first idea that, from my experience, that I think can translate and you can use in your own teaching. So think for a moment about one assignment that you already give, not a new AI assignment, something that you already teach. Could AI generate something, a response, an interpretation, a solution, an argument, and could evaluating that output become part of what students learn and have to do? Now, for me, this assignment, this first single assignment, turned into a much bigger project. I received a grant to develop an AI integrated version of my course, and I piloted in the spring. And so, from that single assignment, AI became a discussion-based semester-long discovery built into the existing curriculum. So in weekly discussions, the student investigated nutrition claims, they experimented with different AI tools, they learned the basics of prompt engineering and grounding. They verified and cross-checked the sources and then reflected on limitations, responsible use, and ethics. So AI became just another lens through which the students engage with the curriculum. And I gotta say the student response was very positive in my case. So I'm teaching this integrated course version again this fall. But integrating AI throughout the course created another problem. My AI policy didn't make any more sense. So here we go. My AI policy did a U-turn. It went from restriction to transparency. So instead of asking, did you use AI? Now I ask, how did you use AI? And um, it focused really on transparency and on this AI use statement that I asked them to provide at the end of each assignment. But grading had to change its also because in a world where everybody can use AI to generate very good polished content very quickly, what makes our work stand out, right? What makes us different? And that's critical thinking, personal reflection, our lived experiences, our original perspective, our unique voice. Those are the things that AI cannot replicate. And those are the skills that I want my students to develop and demonstrate throughout the course. So after this spring semester, I joined another training from Google about GenAI. It's a GenAI leader certification. And then I also went to Camp AI 2.0 again just last week. And this time I had a very different focus. I've been exposed to different tools and I wanted to see how AI could amplify, could improve something that I already do, a process, and help me do that at scale. And that's how my diet record assistant was born. This is my first custom instructional agent. It takes a problem in my course. My students have to complete a 3-day food record, and I spend a lot of time reviewing these records. They're incomplete, inaccurate, too vague, ambiguous. My feedback is slow and it doesn't always get integrated into the record before they input that into the analysis. So the agent has the job of collecting the record, helping students identify gaps, ask questions, adaptive questions, and then generate an analysis ready record. The assistant is designed around my own approach to giving that feedback. And what is the advantage of building your own agent rather than having students just use AI? The advantage is really that you can customize it and tailor it to your needs. And I created my agent around a defined role, a specific goal, an adaptive process, and clear boundaries. In my case, the role is to uh, uh, be a dietary record assistant, not a nutrition tutor, not an evaluator of diets, not a source of health advice. The goal is to help the students create this complete and accurate food record that is ready to be entered into the nutrition analysis software. And the process is adaptive. The agent will ask the minimum number of high impact questions to improve accuracy, but also reduce friction. And then there are clear boundaries. They shouldn't force false precision. It should not invent information. Should be mindful of linguistic and cultural differences. It should be sensitive to mental health issues, especially eating disorders. There is a lot of that. And most importantly, it should stay within the scope. And I think that this framework is portable. So if you're considering building an agent for your own course, you can start without knowing anything about the technology. You can just give it a role, give it a goal, a process, and then clear boundaries. Oh, sorry. I'm over. Okay.
You're not, you just have 1 minute left.
Oh, okay.
You're perfect.
Okay, so just think about this for a second, and like, what do you already do well as an instructor that AI may help extend, amplify for you? Now, I'm going to go a little quicker to the end, but on the instruction role, I also sometimes I just want AI to do some work for me. So for example, I created an agent in Brightspace that finds students who haven't accessed the course and then sends them an email. I also turned my AI policy into a short video. I built an advising assistant that can answer some of the routine questions students ask about our nutrition program, and I'm working on an exam prep coach. Um, and this is really my philosophy now. Like, I think about AI as my wash machine. When the machine started doing work for us, um, they took a lot of our physical work away, which was great. I don't need to wash my clothes by hand anymore, but I do need to exercise. I do need to stay active to stay healthy. And that's how I think about AI. I can offload some of the cognitive work, but I still need to think, reason, and create. But there is a new question and a new challenge. Now, I am about to teach a new course in the fall, which is food and culture, which is a writing intensive course. Now, what if now before the writing was the product and the students would show their what they knew through writing, but now writing is part of the learning outcome. So, how am I gonna integrate AI when writing needs to be practiced? Now, I don't have it figured out yet, and I'm happy to talk about it in a Q&A if you have questions. And in the spirit of my own policy, this is my AI disclosure statement. I use ChatGPT to help organize and refine my ideas for this presentation and to assist with slide generation. But all the experiences, perspectives, examples, and conclusions are my own. Thank you so much.
Slade.
Awesome.
Sharon.
So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. Hi, everybody. My name is Kirsten Green. Can you hear me okay? Okay, awesome. I'm an associate professor and a director of childhood ed in the Department of Curriculum and Teaching. So I can't see the timer. Oh, no. Can I see the timer? I can't see the timer. So I'm going to set my own timer just to keep myself on track over here.
I just started it.
Oh, you did. It's not showing on my screen for some reason, maybe because I'm sharing. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of, oh, I see it now. Thanks. A little bit of context, share some of the assumptions that I went into teaching an AI integrated course with, talk about how I corrected our course a little bit. I got a lot of resistance, and I'm excited to talk about that in a forum like this. I'll share some sample activities, how I sort of amended and then differentiated my instruction, given the challenges that came up around the tension of using it in my course. And then some preliminary lessons learned. And I feel like that's the weakest part of my presentation. I did not use ChatGPT to help or Copilot. And I feel like in the future I may, especially when I agree to do something in the summer, a week before I move, and everything is bananas. So forgive me, but I hope that we'll have another opportunity to talk more about the lessons learned. It keeps evolving. So in terms of context, the course was an advanced literacy methods course. It is required for all students seeking certification through a master's in childhood education. So they'll be teaching children in grades 1 through 6. It's the second course in a 2-course series on how to teach writing and reading. And it's not always taught in the summer, but this particular course that I'm going to be referring to was taught in the summer, which means we have no access to first through sixth grade classes, which is a challenge. And it's a logical place when talking about literacy to talk about generative AI literacy, but the course is already jam-packed. So that was a particular challenge. This course is typically taught in person, but the version I taught was online mix, so partly asynchronous and partly synchronous. My context is that I'm a former third and fifth grade teacher and literacy coach in New York City public schools. I've been a teacher educator for 20 years, a little bit more than that actually. And then I've also been heavily involved in the CUNY Computed Integrated Teacher Education Initiative. So if you're not in schools of ed, you may not be aware of that, but we've had a longitudinal initiative within CUNY to get technology integrated in teacher education. So that's been a process where this conversation has lodged. And I'm a parent of an 11-year-old. So this is very much aligned with what's going on with my child's life. I'm also increasingly, I think, identifying as an AI techno-skeptic, which I can share a little bit more later if you'd like, but somebody who sees the possibilities and is scared of it all at the same time. And these are just adorable photos of my child because why not? His first day of kindergarten, he started kindergarten on an iPad sitting next to me during the pandemic. And this is him a couple weeks ago touching grass because our battle with screens has been mighty. Our course overview, I won't go into everything that the course taught, but basic things around how to teach literacy. And then I added an element of beginning to develop a stance on AI in education, and especially the teaching of reading and writing, and how that impacts. I added a learning goal for our students to understand both the possibilities and problems of AI literacy, and the impacts of it on teaching literacy in grades 1 to 6. So the way I introduced AI in our class with our students was pretty open. I thought it was like an invitation. It was really open-ended. I really wanted our students I wanted to foster a critical and curious stance. I did acknowledge that in education, we are arguably building the ship while sailing it in this moment. And it's an opportunity to learn together. We are not sure what the right and wrong answers are right now when it comes to teaching AI. And so there are questions around whether or not that's actually true. Or like some of my students had really principled resistance and felt very strongly that absolutely AI has no place in an elementary school classroom. And so we talked about some of those tensions. And I asked students to be prepared to lean in, to make mistakes, to fall forward, to learn about what's unfolding in this historical moment, because education is arguably a contested space. The approach that I took really was sort of 3 parts. Around new knowledge, I wanted students to gain an understanding of what generative AI is. And of course, they're coming at this with very varied understandings already, but how it functions and how it's being used in school. So that I saw as new knowledge. I then also wanted my class to be a space of experimentation where students had a low stakes opportunity to experiment. I'm sure this looks different in different contexts and different fields, but there's been a lot of worry within teacher education, I would argue, around cheating. Is my voice being either diluted or replaced, right? And so I wanted students to not feel like I was going to catch them in cheating if they use AI in this course. Obviously, I wanted them to experiment with me. We're all learning this together, arguably. And then I wanted there to be lots of reflection and for students to have ample time throughout the course to share their up-to-date thoughts, feelings, and opinions. So the primary ways that I encourage students to use Copilot, and the reason we use Copilot is because it's, through the Outlook installation in what we use on campus through Microsoft. So I didn't want to engage in any sort of third-party paywalls or FERPA compliance or any. I wanted to use what we have offered here at Hunter. So I suggested students use it as a thought partner, like for bouncing ideas for a lesson plan or unit plan, for proofreading, for checking for accuracy and sense in written material, for providing feedback, like asking it, what do you think about this, how my lesson plan flows and the differentiated instruction I use. And I'm sorry, my bullet looks like it's, I forgot the second parents here. As a co-researcher, I'm looking to do a lesson on this. I'm looking for children's books on this topic. It's much faster than when I was a 5th grade teacher to ask a tool like Copilot for suggestions than it would be to go to the local library or even do internet research. I primarily had students operate with Copilot during async work sessions. Okay, so for example, this is just one example of an assignment that I gave. I explained to students, you're doing a lot of reading and writing. So write 266 paragraphs about what you think about it. Okay. Jot your thinking here. I then asked them, now copy paste this prompt where I asked them to, sort of, my prompt engineering is still coming along. I will say that. But I essentially asked students to say, my instructor asked me to write a succinct couple of paragraphs about what I learned. Can you help me make it a little bit better, refine it? I had them copy paste the response, and then what was their reaction? Did Copilot help you refine? Why or why not? What was your reaction? So the first responses begin to roll in. Some students were really excited and interested. Like, I found this to be really interesting. Now that AI is so heavily incorporated into people's lives, it's important for them to see how we can help both students and teachers without harming them. I can see my writing is much more polished and professional. There was some additional vocabulary used by Copilot that I had not added, which changed my voice. And then goes on to say it sounded more professional and businesslike than my personal reflection. And then students started reflecting on how that voice really changed beyond their comfort level. I had, additional reflections where students were like, I was nervous. Are you sure this is allowed? This feels like cheating, and then there were also reflections on how Copilot was so reassuring and affirming and flattering of what students had written. And I realized that my time is already somewhat limited, so I'm going to go a little bit faster here. A student compared what I was asking them to do to having asked a person or another generative AI tool for assistance on a cover letter. They said, I did not appreciate how extreme it made some of the changes. And so I would definitely reject those changes, whether they were from AI or from a friend. So making that parallel. And then I started getting some reflections that were really, really negative and sort of like, why are you asking me to do this, Dr. Green? And I felt for the first time in my career, like I had asked students to do something that was so nefarious and really in contrast to what I believe to be okay in the world. And so it was this moment where I thought I was paving this, creating a pathway where they could ask any questions they wanted and in a really low stakes, safe environment. And they were like, I cannot believe you asked me to hurt the environment by doing this. And so that created a situation in which I really needed to rethink what my assignments were going to look like. So I have some more examples, but I'm going to go faster. The next time we met, those reflections were shared in an asynchronous environment. So the next time we met, I had them do a synchronous, like, let's just brass tacks, anonymously share some of your real feelings. And wow, did they ever. I don't have time to go into this, but it'll be a paper at some point. I then went back the next time in class and shared a bit more about my own experience. Like, I wrote my college applications on a typewriter, y'all. Like, this change has been fast for all of us. And this historical moment is something we're experiencing together. So to just give you a little bit of a snapshot of the ways in which I then updated my assignments and really created what I called AI alt assignments, is instead of saying, okay, go into Copilot and do this research, I was like, use your tool that you would like to do research around AI and the impacts and share what you think. So I expanded some of the assignments to include other tools that were not AI generated. I also then, when I asked students to ask, like at one point I asked students to closely read an article, write a summary, and then ask Copilot to summarize that same article and then compare those summaries. So instead of asking the students who were morally opposed to doing it, I provided the AI generated sample. So I see that I'm running at 1 minute left. So, the whole point of my asking students to do this was to have them reflect on what it did, compare to what they generated on their own, and make some, draw some conclusions about that, right? The students that they're teaching are going to have these tools available to them in classrooms. That's already happening. So what are we going to do about it as teachers? I really wanted them to think about that. And it was so interesting to just see how things unfolded. So instead of asking them things like, how do you think generative AI may be changing how people read? After doing research on Copilot, I started sharing a little bit more specific context. Like the curricula that's already being used in New York City, HMH, is already tying AI tools to their teacher manuals and to the curriculum. What are we going to do about it? What should we plan to think about in teacher education? And those yielded some really interesting conversations. So just to sort of wrap up, and again, this is the part that I feel like we'll keep talking about. It keeps changing daily. Students' experiences with generative AI vary so widely. I really thought that I was going into a place where students were going to be like, let's experiment. I've gotten caught doing AI, being accused of doing AI when I haven't been using it. I don't know when I can. This is an exciting moment, right? We're all going to be on the same page. Not what happened. Some students are understandably, morally, and ethically opposed to using generative AI at all, especially due to the consequences on the environment, poor and working class communities, and communities of color. And we need to talk about that up front and center. During the course of my course, the Governor Hochul decision to pause data center development in the state of New York happened. And so that was like this, historical moment that we were able to unpack. Like, their feelings are not distinct from other people's feelings in the state of New York, right? And there's policy that's already being developed to challenge it. Issues around consent, participation, where we're headed are valid, and students need more time to reflect. Although the latest research in teacher ed indicates that technology infusion should really be across the board in all classes, and it shouldn't just be like one-off class, I do think that we need a separate but infused or integrated conversation around this for teacher education. And I'd argue that this window is rapidly closing, and that teachers lack a collective voice and opportunity to approach and understand what's happening. So very quickly, and I'm so sorry, Christina, I'm wrapping up, I promise. We have to assess. I didn't do a pre-test or I'm not a quantitative person in that sense, like pre and post tests, but I did not sort of ask students, like, what do you know from the beginning? I made major assumptions, and that was problematic. Learning about a generative AI in a course in which we're also teaching students that teaching literacy is more than learning about reading and writing. It's about what Paulo Freire teaches us about reading not only the word, but also the world. So we're talking about culturally responsive, sustaining practices, and students are like, the contradiction is so clear, Dr. Green, like, why are we not? So as a scholar activist, as a longtime anti-racist and anti-oppressive teacher, that glaring omission in what I did was so stark, and I'm so grateful to my students for making that connection. And I'm being, sorry, I think I pressed something. Anyway, I have another couple of conclusions drawn, but I think I've already covered all of it. There's one last thing that I wrote about a couple years ago, almost 8 years ago, about something called digital whiplash that I was experiencing along with colleagues, just being bombarded repeatedly in the classroom with use this new tech, use this new tech. That is happening at Mach speed now. Students feel like pinballs, teachers feel like pinballs, and we need time to figure out what we're going to do. What is the why behind the what? So I'll put my slide deck in the chat if anybody wants. Thank you for letting me go over a couple minutes, and I look forward to chatting more with you. Thanks.
Hello all. I'm hoping you can hear me okay. Great. And you're seeing my whole slide?
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, welcome. And so I'm Raymond Zakaria. I'm a clinical professor at the School of Nursing. And what I'm going to talk about may echo some of what you've already heard. But essentially, I'm going to come at this and say AI is not really the problem. Maybe our assessments are the problem. And all this is doing is looking at the issue of validity. So over the past 2 years, a lot of the conversation has been around how do we stop students from using AI? And so I want to suggest that that's probably the wrong question. So I'm going to shift the conversation from academic integrity to assessment validity. So instead of asking, did a student use AI? The more important question is, what evidence do we have that the student actually engaged in the reasoning, analysis, interpretation, judgment? And so the goal is more practical. So I hope it'll also give you a framework to show you how I have implemented this. So this slide contains the thought experiment that drives the rest of the presentation. So I want you to imagine that a student's submitting an assignment and the writing is excellent and it's organized and clear, and the argument is very sound. And by every traditional measure, it looks like strong work. And now I want you to think that AI wrote every word. And so the question now is, did they learn anything? So that's where the conversation then turns to like plagiarism and AI detectors and policy debates. But the more important question here is, was this assignment ever capable of showing us the learning that you had cared about in the first place? So in assessment language, this is essentially the concept of validity. So as we move through the rest of the presentation, keep that question in mind. What exactly are we measuring, and how confident are we that our assessment is able to truly capture it? So on the left side here, you'll see what I've separated AI exposed from what AI actually has changed. On the left side, what AI exposed were these assessments and measure products more than a process. And we have prompts that reward fluent writing more than disciplined thinking. And our rubrics often struggle to distinguish genuine reasoning from a well-generated content, essentially. So in other words, AI revealed that weakness that were already there to begin with. On the right side of the screen here, you have this issue of AI not eliminating a student's ability to reason. It doesn't remove the need for mentorship. It doesn't make professional judgment obsolete. And it certainly did not eliminate the need for any sort of ethical accountability. So whether you teach chemistry or history, nursing, engineering, philosophy, your graduates will still face situations where there is no answer key. And they're going to need to interpret evidence and navigate uncertainty and justify their decisions with the consequences and learn to live with those consequences as well. So that is what is uniquely a human activity. Knowledge is becoming increasingly cheap and readily accessible. So education is going to move from teaching how, and we need to really encourage the why are we learning this and what are the implications. So the challenge is not that we're going to preserve every assignment exactly as it was pre-AI. The challenge is going to be to design assessments that make reasoning and judgment and accountability much more visible. So this slide summarizes what I think the two most common reactions to AI are, and then the third option, which I'm offering here. The first reaction is this blanket prohibition, no AI allowed. And, you know, that feels safe and comfortable, and we're used to banning things. And then we have the issue of if students graduate without learning how to use these tools responsibly, are we leaving them unprepared for life, essentially? And I would say that that's almost academic malpractice to a graduate student, at least, to put them into a world saturated with AI at every level, and then they have no idea how to critically or ethically or responsibly interact with it. The opposite extreme is not the answer either. That's the second reaction. Here, use AI as much as you like for whatever you want. And that sounds flexible and student-centered, but it creates a different problem. If AI performs the analysis and the drafting and the revision, well, the student may never learn how to develop those habits of thinking that we actually care about. So that becomes consumers of answers rather than producers of judgment. So that's why I think both extremes miss the mark. This third path, the middle road, if you will, is this scaffolded integration where students can use AI, but they have to use it transparently and accountably. So the question where they are learning to question outputs and verify claims, identify errors and disclose contributions, and then ideally defend their reasoning. So these aren't really AI skills. They're the same habits of critical thinking and professional judgment and ethical accountability that we've always wanted our students to develop. And so the technology will continually change, but regardless of the newest tech of the day, the habits should not. So at this point, I want to shift from theory to self-reflection. So this slide asks us to look at our own assessments through a different lens. Not whether AI is good or bad, but whether the student thinking is actually visible. So consider one of your current assignments and ask yourself, could a student complete this assignment without deeply engaging with the material? Are you rewarding polished output more than the thinking that produced it? And perhaps the most uncomfortable question is, if AI generated most of the response, would you even know it? Because it's getting better. And so for many traditional assignments, the honest answer is I'm not sure. But take a look at the questions with the check marks here. Does the assignment require students to make a decision and defend it? Can I observe the thinking process and not just a final product? Does the student have to explain what they accepted, rejected, and why? Notice none of these questions require you to ban AI. They simply ask whether the assessment provides meaningful evidence of the student's thinking. So that discipline, the discipline doesn't matter whether you're a historian, an engineer, a scientist, a nurse, or an educator. But the use may differ a bit, but the principle basically remains the same. So the strongest assessments don't just reveal what the students concluded, it's looking at how did you get there. So this slide answers the practical question that I often hear. So what should our AI policy be? And my answer is that policy matters, but policy alone is not enough. What we need is this developmental sequence. So think about how we each teach writing, research, clinical judgment, laboratory skills, professional communication. We never really expect mastery on day one. We generally give structure early, and then we gradually remove any support as the student becomes more competent. So that same principle can apply to using AI. So in phase one, you might have this guided transparency where the goal is honesty alone. Students just disclose AI use, verify basic claims, and begin to build some sort of accountable habits. In phase two, you may move to this co-constructed inquiry, and the focus will shift from disclosure to evaluation. So the student will place their reasoning alongside AI outputs and then explain what they accepted, modified, or rejected. Then in phase three, you have this independent mastery where students design their own workflows and defend their reasoning. So at that particular point, we're not asking, did you use AI? We're asking, can you remain accountable while using it? Because the most important line is this last slide here. Judgment can't be outsourced. Students may be outsourcing the drafting and the formatting and even some of the routine tasks, but they can't outsource the responsibility for deciding what is true, justified, and what should be done. So that decision-making remains entirely human. This slide captures what I believe is the most important shift, and that is for the past few years, much of the conversation has been around integrity and use. But notice what happens when we frame the problem that way. The tool becomes a threat. Faculty become detectives and students become suspects, right? So the conversation quickly turns to technological arms racing involving directors and surveillance tools and workarounds. And I'm not convinced that's necessarily sustainable. I mean, yes, now Claude is going to put watermarking and the like, and they all apparently have been doing it and we didn't know it. But I think the better question is the one on the right. How did AI influence the student's reasoning? That's the question that shifts the focus from detection to disclosure. So instead of asking whether it was involved AI, we will ask what shaped their thinking. What did they accept, reject, and verify? And what judgments remained their responsibility? That accountability doesn't disappear in this model, and if anything, it increases it. So students are no longer accountable only for the final products. They're accountable for the reasoning process that produced it. And that's why I think integrity in the AI era should be understood as a countable process and not simply this detectable product. So let's go to the next slide here. So I want to close with something very practical. When we talk about AI, it's easy to leave thinking the solution requires a new policy, a committee, a complete course redesign, and I don't think that's true. In fact, most faculty could begin tomorrow by starting with one assignment. If you ask yourself, could a student complete this successfully without really reading, thinking, or making a decision? If the answer to that is yes, then the problem may not be the technology. The problem may be what it is you're asking them to do. And then second, you need to consider adding a simple AI usage statement, just a sentence or two describing whether AI was used and how it was used and what was verified or changed. Third, I'd say try a brief reflection exercise by asking the student what they asked AI and what they found useful and what they challenged and what they ultimately changed. So this final position puts you in the role of epistemic mentor, and you can see how an expert thinks as you interrogate what they're writing and what they're thinking. So you can ask AI a question in class together, let them see this, and you can see the output and verify the claim and challenge the answer, and then show them what good judgment looks like in practice, because ultimately the job is going to be not to teach them how to necessarily use AI, but how to be accountable for the output. And so AI didn't make assessment impossible. It just made a weak assessment harder to ignore. And the goal is not to catch students using it. The goal is to design work where reasoning and verification and accountability have to show up.